This is the Financial Survival Network. Now more than ever. The Financial Survival Network.
And welcome. You are listening to and watching the Financial Survival Network. I'm Kerry Lutz. Today is 3/15/21. Well, is there a U-shaped boom on its way? Is COVID finally coming to an end? And what will become of Mr. Dr. Fauci when it does? And what is your opinion? Why don't you send us an email to kl@kerrylutz.com. Right now, John Rubino of dollarcollapse.com is with us. And hey, John, are we going to have this U-shaped recovery? Because originally it was supposed to be a V. Maybe it'll be a slight W. I don't know. A U seems more like it.
Hey, Kerry. Well, you know what? Everybody's just unilaterally ending the lockdowns. I think a lot of states, a lot of people in a lot of states have just gotten so sick of the whole thing that they're just opening back up. And so economic activity is rebounding. Like I think where you are in Florida, it must be booming right now based on the news reports from Miami, where things got so out of hand at spring break, they had to arrest a bunch of people, which isn't really pandemic type behavior. So I think that, the economy is going to come back regardless of what the government does, just because there's so much pent up spending. People are so frustrated that they haven't been able to go to restaurants or out anywhere basically for such a long time that they're going to make up for some of that. So you get, some of what we gave up in the past year is going to come now. But at the same time, we've got massive stimulus still being dumped into the economy. The checks go out this week, the stimulus checks.
Oh, you mean the one that I'm not getting?
You made too much money, Kerry. That's always been your problem, though, right?
Yeah, none of this ever applies to me. Although I did get $1,200 last year. But I'm gonna have to give it back this year because I made too much money. So, give me a break here. And how big a difference is it going to make? Will people be able to start repaying their mortgages and their rent? Remember, we're over $1 billion behind in New York City in rent arrearages. And 92% of all restaurants that are still open, which is an ever dwindling number, are behind on their rent to keep the doors open. I think the landlords got to the point they're not paying their mortgages. So they're just going to say, all right, you got 2 more months. You better start paying. Otherwise, you got to go.
Well, I think they extended the rent forbearance thing for a while. So that's still in place, at least for a few months. So you have basically a lot of people who don't have to pay their bills yet, and they're getting stimulus checks from the government, and they can maybe reopen in the not too distant future. So it looks like there's a lot of disposable income out there. And don't forget the Reddit/Robinhood traders who were financing their stock speculation with all these stimmy checks. And that's going to have an impact on the financial markets, for better or for worse, when they get the next batch of money to play with. And massive stimulus coming from an infrastructure plan that they're putting together. So this is basically heaven for a government right now, where everybody wants you to spend a ton of money. There's no political cost to just, ramping it up, giving everybody in sight extra money, and then doing, the infrastructure thing is something they've been wanting to do for a long time. So now we're going to spend $4-ish trillion on roads and bridges and things over the next 10 years, which is extremely stimulative because, first of all, to build a new bridge, you've got to buy a bunch of raw materials, which pushes their price up. You've got to hire a bunch of well-paid labor, by and large, which puts a lot of money in the pockets of those guys. And then there's a lot of local debt and stuff that goes with it, and it increases traffic, all that stuff. So you pump up a lot of money into the economy with what we're doing right now, but it's coming at a time when the economy might already be snapping back and when a lot of prices are going up. So the question is, is the timing of this wrong? Is the stimulus unnecessary, and is it going to cause more trouble than benefit? And it's completely possible based on how many different things are seeing spiking prices right now. Lumber, God, try to build a house now. I think the average increase from the lumber price in the price of a new house is something like $28,000 over just the last year. Iron ore, copper, you name it, everything is up. So we're going to push the prices of those things up even more with all this stimulus, which is going to feed over into the CPI. And then the Fed has said that, okay, inflation is going to spike, but we're going to ignore that because it's just makeup from the past year. There's a base effect, like it was so low last year that it's going to seem higher this year, but it's not really going to be higher, and I don't know if people are going to buy that. They're going to see the price of a lot of stuff they buy go up. They're going to see the headline number in the CPI go up 3 or 4%. So we might feel like, in other words, the perception might be that we're in an inflationary economy 6 months hence. And it'll be interesting to see how the financial markets respond to that, because traditionally they don't like that. Yeah, so we'll see.
The bond vigilantes are at work as we speak, bidding down the price of treasuries, bidding up the yields, and we're over 1.6. They say, hey, nothing wrong with 2% treasury. And the fact is that these low rates are really pretty shocking, unprecedented throughout history, and yet they've kept them low all this time, which many of you might argue is a good part of the reason why we're in the mess we're in already, because people take on more debt. They don't think about their total liability entry on their personal balance sheet. All you think about is the increase in cash, and you get to do stuff, spend stuff, fix your house, all this good stuff. But the price has to be paid, and it's paid, like you said, in terms of inflation. And what if all this inflation doesn't work, John? What if it really only gives us maybe 1-2 quarters of really strong economic growth, if you can believe the numbers, and then it just peters out after 2 quarters?
Well, it's really important to understand what higher interest rates mean after a period of low interest rates, because low interest rates are basically designed to convince you to borrow money, right, at a low rate. So you end up with a society that's really over leveraged, and a lot of that debt is variable rate. If you've got a prime +2 business loan or an adjustable rate mortgage, or you're a government with a lot of short-term debt that has to be rolled over, you become very sensitive to higher interest rates. And then if interest rates start to go back up, everybody's interest cost spikes, and they don't have as much disposable income as you might think they would, because they're having to pay higher interest on all their debt. And that would be the thing that you're talking about that slows down the economy, that we think we're going to have a boom. And instead, everything just kind of peters out because everybody suddenly has twice the interest costs that they were expecting to have. And that is leaving aside all the financial stability questions that come with higher interest rates, because a lot of financial asset prices have spiked because of low interest rates. So you take that away and you've eliminated the rationale for stocks being as expensive as they are. And of course, higher interest rates means lower bond prices. So they would already get whacked in a higher interest rate environment. Houses aren't worth what they are today. If mortgage rates go back up to 5%, all of a sudden houses are worth 20% less. So all of that would be deflationary and would slow an economy down. So that could be what we're looking at, where we get this kind of, hot few months and a spike in interest rates, and then all of a sudden the economy rolls over because of the high interest rates, or we get a crash in the stock market and the economy rolls over because of that. But yeah, it's a minefield out there now, going from a low interest rate environment to a even modestly higher interest rate environment is really dangerous. And it's not clear how we get from here to normal interest rates without blowing up the whole system. It could be that we can't do it, which is a whole different thing if that turns out to be true.
Yeah, well, never underestimate the government's ability to screw things up. That's what I've learned over my lifetime. And this is a perfect example. we just nobody wants to bite the bullet and say we got to have a 3-4 year recession. We've got to completely restructure the economy. We've got to get rid of all this debt, and it's got to be paid down. Instead, they're thinking of new and creative ways to prolong the agony, and then to greatly amplify the resulting crash that's going to come from it. Hey, this thing, boom, might go on for a year. Maybe it goes on for 2 years. Maybe that's what the stock market's saying. Inflation be damned. We're happy because stock prices are going to go up for another 2 years. I just had Elliott wave theorist on my show, Avi Gilbert. He seems to think we're going to look at S&P 6,000, John, and that it's going to go until 2023. Now, I tend to take the Yogi Berra view towards forecasting. He said prediction is really tough, especially when it's about the future. Who knows? But maybe it'll all go up because of inflation. I remember on Saturday Night Live when Jimmy Carter was president, it was around then, and they had a skit, and he said, I got a secret economic plan. I'm going to use inflation to make everyone a millionaire. And it looks like we're using the Jimmy Carter plan now. Inflation is going to make you a millionaire, but there can only be so many millionaires, right, John?
Well, now we're going to make you a billionaire, because a millionaire is nothing special with the stock market where it is right now. There's no way to know when this ends, but we can kind of sort of point to the things that might pop the bubble, which is at least something. The whole higher interest rate thing could easily do it. And there are a few other things. If inflation just spikes in a way that terrifies people, because the Fed's going to step in and try yield curve control, where they push down longer interest rates, like 10-year rates and 20-year rates. And so assume they do that successfully and interest rates stop rising, we could still get a spike in a lot of prices, which is to say a collapse in the value of the dollar versus whatever thing is seeing its price spike. So what we've done then effectively is shifted the pressure away from prices and away from interest rates and towards the currency. And that's really the end game. So it's possible that we can keep this thing going longer by suppressing interest rates at the long end of the yield curve. But then that leads us to a currency crisis, which, it's really the end of this process. So, my attitude is let's get it over with and just, take the pain that we have to take and then try to set up something sustainable on the other side of it. That's not the government's point of view, obviously, but that could be what happens if we try to suppress interest rates and then let inflation run wild, and that crashes the currency. So, there are things that could pop this bubble. We can kind of see them coming, and it could be one, it could be another, but we can't predict the timing, like you said, because it's not clear how long it takes to get from here to 3.5% on the 10-year Treasury yield, or from here to 6 or 7% industrial commodity inflation, or whatever. We don't know how long that'll take, but we're heading in the direction of that kind of stuff. And once it gets going, you can't really put that genie back in the bottle very easily. So once inflation pierces 2.5%, 3%, and then keeps on going, it's not clear the government has any tools left to stop that. It'll just run wild until the currency collapses, and then, then the system breaks down and we have to rebuild something else. So it wouldn't surprise me if it was within a couple of years that all this happens, not very long at this point. So buy gold, get out of treasury bonds.
It always comes down to that in the end, doesn't it?
All roads lead to precious metals at this point, because anything we do is going to be disruptive and lead people out of risky things and into safe things. And that process always sends a lot of capital into precious metals. The amount of investable capital that exists in the world right now just dwarfs the amount of silver and gold. So it's a very small door for everyone to try to get through at the same time. But again, that's another thing that's happening at some point out there. It's not a question of if it's going to happen, but it's a question of when everybody decides to head for the exit at once, and gold goes to $10,000 and silver goes to $200 or $300. It's out there waiting to happen. So it makes sense to position yourself so you at least benefit somewhat from it when it does happen.
Yeah, could not agree with you more. But in the meantime, we've got things returning back to normal in Miami. We've got rioting spring breakers, drugged out, drinking on the beach, and God knows what else they're doing there. And ordinarily, I'd be aghast at it, but now it's like, hey, this is great. Everything's getting back to normal. And pretty soon, Fauci is going to become a footnote again.
Poor Anthony Fauci. He keeps talking, right? Oh, the European strains of the virus are coming this way, and they're way more infectious. We can't lock down yet. Everybody's ignoring him. Miami is rocking. Texas has completely taken away the lockdown. Who else? Several other states have basically ended the lockdown, right? And if they don't descend into chaos, so that puts a lot of pressure on you guys in Miami there, Kerry, because descending into chaos might mean that we have to go back on lockdown. But if we don't descend into lockdown, then or descend into chaos, then most other states will lift their lockdowns, and that'll be it. The federal government can say whatever it wants, but it won't be able to force governors to go back to lockdowns if their people don't want to do it anymore.
And it looks like less and less appetite. I mean, look what's happening in California with Gavin Newsom's recall. It's directly a result of his hypocrisy and his ridiculous lockdown policies. Killer Cuomo, he's having his issues. And it's in part due to the lockdown because everybody's fed up with it and they just want him out. And it's also due to his malfeasance and the way he's handled things, but we don't need to get into that. It's just another indicator of descent into chaos and people getting fed up with unreasonable restrictions on your freedom.
Of all the really funny players out there in this, I think the California teachers unions are really the funniest, because at least in LA, they refuse to go back to work, even though the government is trying to kind of nudge them in that direction. But on private messaging apps and stuff like that, they're telling each other, okay, don't put your vacation plans on Facebook because people might misunderstand.
Yeah.
It's too dangerous to go back to school, but we can go to Acapulco.
Yeah, it's much safer there.
Yeah, safer on the beach. Yeah.
Well, Ted Cruz, he was off to Cancun, and hey.
These guys, they're just amazing. This really is kind of an aristocracy, at least in the minds of the people who are in charge right now, because they really don't think the rules apply to them. Oh, we have to have a lockdown for public safety. And, you can't have Christmas. You can't have a funeral. You can't go visit your mom even though she's dying, you're never going to get to see her alive again. She's going to die alone, but that's just the price we have to pay. Meanwhile, I'm going on vacation with my entire family, and we're not going to wear masks on the plane. Yeah.
Hey, you just look at the number of cases and you look at the curve. Even if you adjust it to make it a 7-day curve, cases are way down. Testing is way down. Now that's interesting, which that means that there's less people who are experiencing symptoms and going to get tested. And then the vaccines, whether you love them or hate them, they appear to have beneficial effects in terms of controlling the new infections of COVID and the seriousness and driving down hospitalizations. In Florida, virtually every person 65 and over who wanted a vaccine dose has gotten it. And now the J&J one is out there, and that's a single shot one that isn't nearly as effective, but is greatly effective in reducing hospitalizations and serious illnesses. So it was declining on its own. We knew that before the vaccine started. The vaccine has greatly increased that rate of decline. And all they're left clinging to, the Faucis of the world, is, but but there's other strains out there and they might kill you. So wear 2 masks. Now, I think it's going to be impossible to get people to wear 1 mask, let alone 2 masks, John.
Yeah, people are just done with this whole thing. And the statistics are just so damning right now. The stuff that's coming out, like Florida and Texas, for instance. Or I'm sorry, Florida and New York and California, where Florida didn't do a lockdown. New York and California did really stringent lockdowns, and the results were basically the same, even though Florida has more senior citizens than those other 2 states. And then the stat that something like 80% of the people who were hospitalized during the pandemic were either overweight or obese.
Yes.
Which means we could totally target the at-risk population. We didn't have to shut down the whole economy.
Like we always said, John, you and I, we said this.
Yeah, I mean, and in defense of the guys in charge, they didn't have all this information when they were making their decisions. But boy, it sure looks like in retrospect that the lockdowns were unnecessary, and that all we had to do was identify the most at-risk parts of the population and then protect them. Yep. We could have let the rest of us could have run free.
I said that from the get-go.
Yeah,
because we knew from China, we knew from Italy and Spain who the most vulnerable people were. There was not even a question about it. It wasn't left to chance. And it was a lot easier to secure those people. Like my oldest friend, he's got asthma. And when he has a cold, it's really bad for him. Got to do different things to clear it up. I don't blame him for not going outside for a year, because it could have been fatal to him. Myself, my comorbidities weren't so bad. I figured I had a 1% chance of dying. If I got COVID, which I probably had I thought I had a 10 to 15% chance. I probably had a 35 to 50% chance, but that made my odds of dying about 0.5%. And the whole mortality, let's not forget that 99.7+% of the population who gets COVID recovers from it once you're outside nursing homes and senior facilities. So to lock down the entire nation, or 0.25% might die, is just insanity. And now we've got the therapeutics, which I can personally attest to, are way, way better than they were at the start of this a year ago. So all those things taken together, we're even in Florida, like there's less than 3,000 people in the entire state hospitalized with COVID. We can't really figure out how many of them are in ICU and intubated, but it appears it's somewhere around 15-20%, the last number I heard. So you're looking at 600 people out of a state of 22 million. All of this policy was not based on any form of science whatsoever. It was based on modeling, which isn't science. And it was based on modeling and fear of the worst case scenario, which never came to pass.
Yeah. And 2020 hindsight and all that. But still, it does look like so much of what we did was unnecessary. And so many of the people who were hurt by this were young, kids who were stuck at home for a whole year. The incidence of young people mental illness is way up, and that's tragic. I mean, because they didn't even have to be locked down in retrospect. Now we know that, and yet they suffered a lot of psychological problems unnecessarily. So, you make mistakes in life, but this was a big one, and the effects of it are going to be felt for years and years, it sounds like.
Oh, for sure. And the effects on the economy, the money printing, inflation, all of these things, really bad consequences of bad policy decisions. Started with the last administration and it carried through. And I just don't understand how they all fell for this. I mean, I'm not saying it wasn't serious. And there are people who are not alive today that would be alive but for COVID. But there's a lot of people who are going to be gone anyway. And I don't mean to sound like Governor Andy Killer Cuomo in saying that. That is a fact. But a lot of people died who wouldn't have otherwise necessarily died if we hadn't gone through this cure it wasn't a cure. People who needed surgery couldn't get it because it was elective. Diagnostic tests that weren't administered, drug overdoses, and suicides all way, way up. And so you have to look. This is why when you make public policy, you need to do a cost benefit analysis of it before you just go making sweeping changes in your life and everybody else's life. Got to analyze it and figure out what the cost is. But hey, this is exactly the reason why we will never be elected to any office, John, and why you and I will never run for office, because we know better. And this is why we've got the current crop of so-called leaders running things and doing a horrendous job, which they have been for decades already. But if you want to get the real scoop on it, then you got to go over to dollarcollapse.com, read John's daily column. It's must reading, and a lot of his other things that he publishes, like top 10 videos. I always get a kick out of them, John. And sign up for his newsletter, sign up for ours at financialsurvivalnetwork.com. John, that's it for today. We will pick up next Monday at the same time.
All right. See you, Kerry.
Now more than ever, the Financial Survival Network.